Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today at the PCA support group meeting. This is our August meeting. And yeah, we think we've got about 85 or 90 of you registered today. So hopefully you're all logging on now as I'm saying hello. I can see the attendee numbers are creeping up, which is great. So welcome. And we have got a really good agenda today. Maybe I'll just hang on for a minute or so for any late arrivals. But yeah, a really good agenda today and looking forward to introducing you to our different speakers. Okay, so let's get going. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and we'll be having some updates about research and the RDS service today, but also really excitingly, we've got two RDS members here to speak to us, which is great. And then that will all take up the first half of the meeting, and then for the second half of the meeting we'll have a panel Q&A discussion. So please do send in any questions that you have that you would like to put to the panel in the questions box, which you should be able to see on your screen. And the panel is made up of members with a lived experience of PCA and also members of our clinical research and support teams as well. So any sorts of questions you have, please do send them in and we'll find someone on the panel to answer them, I'm sure. And just also to be aware that hopefully this meeting will be as PCA friendly as we can make it, but we're conscious that obviously there's a lot of visuals. We hope that in our explanations and talking around the topic, you'll all be able to hear what we're saying and get the main messages that we're trying to communicate. And just thank you for bearing with our format. And also really sorry not to be able to see you all face to face, obviously, but really glad that those of you who might not have been able to join us, even if we were face to face, are able to join us in this online format. That's really encouraging. So thank you all for being here. Just to introduce myself, sorry, I've just realised I haven't done that. I'm Emma Harding and a research fellow at the Dementia Research Centre, and have worked on a PCA research project for a number of years now. And I'm now working on the Rare Dementia Support Impact Study, which is studying the impacts of support groups for people with rarer types of dementia. And have also helped to lead the PCA support group for a number of years now. So hopefully I know many of you who are watching, and welcome to any of you who are here for the first time. And Seb, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Emma. Yes, good morning, everyone. My name's Seb Crutch. I'm one of the psychologists at the Dementia Research Centre and involved in co-leading rare dementia support. And I'd just like to echo Emma's warm welcome wherever you are. I think from meeting with the team, the wider team at Rare Dementia Support, who you'll be meeting during the meeting. I've said the word meeting 3 times now, but in the absence of our being able to physically get together, you'll be seeing on your screens and hearing from a number of the team. But we're all scattered around in different places, as I'm sure you are. And we hope wherever you're coming to us from, whether it's in the UK or abroad, that we can have some sense of community together. And I also just wanted to second what Emma said about, we're very aware that particularly for those of you living with PCA, that a meeting format like we have today, of small images of faces on the screens, is not ideal. And for me in particular, I just noticed looking at my image on the screen that depending on the light coming through the window where I am, my face invariably appears sometimes like a face and sometimes like a sort of very bright triangle of light. And that, I guess, echoes so many of the stories we've heard in these meetings over the years of the strange and unusual ways in which these brain sight problems caused by PCA and other difficulties can affect your lives. So we're very aware that this is not the perfect format, but we hope that with goodwill and a good internet connection, you'll at least be able to hear our voices clearly and be able to share in some of the stories, and of course be able to share your own stories and questions when we come to the question answer format a bit later on. It's also just a brief reminder that this is very much not the only way in which you can chat to members of the team. as Olivia and Mckee will be saying later on, the direct support team is available at any time for phone and email conversations by arrangement with you about issues that are currently very pressing for you, or just to keep in touch. And many of us have also had the privilege of being involved in new small online discussion groups that we've set up during lockdown, where we can talk about deeper issues in a more intimate setting with half a dozen or so other people in a similar situation to you. So if either of those formats are appealing, then please do watch out for our letter that will go out around the beginning of September telling you about our programme for the year ahead. Emma, back to you.
Thanks, Seb. Okay, so very excited to introduce our first speaker, and what will happen now is we're going to break to a short video interview, which is part of a series called Conversations with Experts, which has been led and produced by Dr. Chris Hardy, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the Dementia Research Centre and also the Education Officer for Rare Dementia Support. And the idea with these videos is to have experts who have lived with the condition and have a lived experience of a condition alongside professional experts asking questions of each other to hopefully capture some of the different expertise around those experiences. And the idea is that these will be educational resources that we can share with different professionals and students and people affected by different rare dementias to really share some of that information and knowledge about the condition. So the video we're going to play you now is one of our RDS PCA support group members, Valerie Mansfield, whose late husband Peter had PCA, and this is a brief video of Val in conversation with Seb about the experience of PCA. And this is a short version of a 1 hour video, which we'll be able to link you to after the meeting if you would like to see the full video. And if there's anything in here that you would like to ask questions of Val and Seb in the discussion section later on, please do send those in. And I'm going to hand over, and Millie in the background now is going to work some magic and play the video. So we'll see you after this.
Great, it's lovely to see you, Val. It's been a little while since we've spoken, and so I was curious to know maybe if you could tell us a little bit about what you'd first noticed, you and Peter, what first changed, what started you down this route.
Yes, thank you. Odd things started in 2011 when Peter became highly anxious about things, and he'd always been a very calm man who didn't seem to be fazed by tremendous work pressures or anything. So that seemed a bit strange, but we wondered if perhaps it was his sister had died, my mother had died, whether there were additional things, but didn't think too much of that. And then lots of very strange unrelated things started to happen over the course of the next year and a half. When he was driving, he would sometimes not be sure of the lane that he should be in and whether the traffic lights were in the lane that he was driving in. Now, this didn't happen very often, but it was just something he noticed, and he knew the road extremely well. Sometimes he'd be walking down the road and he'd start shuffling as if he couldn't walk properly, or he would trip up, but then that disappeared. Occasionally he'd be cooking something and then he'd almost fall asleep when he was eating his food, or he'd become quite sleepy during the day at different times and then wake up again. And then pegging out washing on the line, he would peg it out over 4 parts of the line and perhaps put 6 pegs together. And his visual spatial awareness had always been very good as a very accomplished artist himself. So there were lots of things that we couldn't quite put our finger on, but we didn't know, we knew something was happening, but we didn't know what it was.
And over what sort of period was this happening?
So this was 2011. By 2013, there were quite a lot of other things that seemed to be creeping in. It was taking him a long time to go shopping, and I couldn't work out why he was away so long. And he was following a recipe, but he'd walk around the supermarket to try and find things in the order on the recipe card, because he didn't really remember where the different sections were. So it was taking him sometimes 3 hours to shop for things for a meal, and we couldn't work out why that was taking a long time. And then cutting food up, it would be in different sizes and shapes. So this was 2011, and he did actually have an appointment with a neurologist in 2013, and they sent him for all sorts of tests, as lots of people have. He went to Bristol to see a consultant for normal pressure hydrocephalus, but that wasn't conclusive. And so by 2014, he didn't feel he'd been given health psychology tests, visual field tests, and nothing seemed to come back conclusive. So we did ask for a second opinion, actually, and managed to find ourselves at the Specialist Cognitive Disorder Clinic, having had a diagnosis in 2015 of posterior cortical atrophy. I am interested to know, obviously some people may well be watching this who've been told they have PCA but have never really had it explained to them by a specialist. Please, would you be able to explain this to us and give further information to people who may well be in the early stages of finding their way through?
Sure. So I suppose I most often describe PCA as a progressive disorder affecting the back of the brain. And the most common thing people describe are some of the difficulties that you were noticing and describing in Peter, those difficulties of seeing what things are and where they are. But of course, as we've come to realize, particularly in recent years and with discussions with people such as yourself and other members of the support group, it's very much not just a visual dementia, even if that kind of, for ease, label it, but actually it's because it affects all of the skills that are supported by the back of the brain. Then lots of people also notice early changes in things like calculation and spelling and writing, difficulties with parts of everyday life that require kind of ordering or understanding magnitude. So even a simple task like if you've got some leftovers after dinner, judging what size of pot to put the leftovers into becomes very difficult. And also increasingly realizing people might have some difficulties with things like their sense of balance or their body position. And we've certainly lost count of the number of people who've talked about dressing difficulties, from the kind of the simple, like getting your sleeve in a jacket, to the downright frustrating and personal, like getting your pants the wrong way around, or difficulty putting a tie on. And I suppose one of the other kind of confusions or frustrations sometimes people have about the label PCA is the distinction between the fact that it's a syndrome. It's basically a description of a bunch of symptoms and experiences, very similar to what you described. But it's not a disease in its own right. So we know that PCA, the syndrome, this progressive set of visual and other spatial and so forth problems, can be caused by several different neurodegenerative diseases. By far and away, the most common one is Alzheimer's disease. Probably 80, maybe 90% of people with PCA have it because there's Alzheimer's disease, the plaques and tangles of that disease affecting the back of their brain, the visual and other centers of the brain rather than the memory centers. But there are also a couple of other conditions, diseases that can cause PCA, such as Lewy body disease or something called corticobasal degeneration. And I guess particularly in relation to the label Alzheimer's disease, because that's such a well-known term, and because many people have such strong preconceptions about it, then certainly in our support group, as you yourself will know, lots of people are very averse to using that label, for fear that saying that they've got Alzheimer's disease will lead people to presume a whole bunch of things about them which aren't true, because living with PCA does seem to be really very different to living with typical memory-led Alzheimer's disease. It may be the same disease, but because it's affecting very different parts of the brain, the challenges, the uncertainties, the questions people have are really quite markedly different. And do you mind me asking how you would describe PCA or posterior cortical atrophy to other people? For all those many people you came across, and I'm sure family and friends as well who didn't likewise had never heard of it, how did you describe it? What in your own or your and Peter's words, what did you say was happening with him?
I think we tried to make it quite simple, although we appreciate it's a very complicated, rare disorder. So we just tried to say that sometimes things may not look the same. The perception of where something is or how you see things may well look very different to Peter, to us. And I'll give you an example. When we were bird watching, one of our friends said, "Oh, look at that heron over there, he's right in front of us." And Peter couldn't see it. It was very static, huge bird. And our friend got very frustrated and said, "But you must be able to see it, it's right in front of you." And he said, "I'm really sorry, I can't see it." And then a bit later, he said, "Oh, can you see that wren in the leaves there?" And our friend said, "How can you see that, but you can't see a heron?" And obviously, you know, the wren was moving, but it was still camouflage. So a lot of people were grateful that we tried to explain what the difficulties were.
I'm sure. And in the days and sort of weeks after the diagnosis, how do you go about figuring out how to live with this condition? You'd had all these years of uncertainty, and now you had a label, but as you say, not necessarily a full understanding of what that meant for now or for the future. What did the day-to-day look like, and what were the kind of challenges you were facing?
I think initially we tried to keep going. We always liked walking, and so we would still go and walk. We would still meet with friends, and we were fortunate to have friends who would take us out when driving became difficult for me, because we had a car accident part the way through, and I then couldn't drive for 6 months, so that wasn't very helpful. So we just tried to do as much as we could, and because we had a very good supportive network, I think we were very fortunate to still be able to do a lot of things. Obviously, there were days where we felt quite disheartened, and I think there were some days when the medication needed to get, it was rivastigmine patches Peter had. Sometimes when the medication initially started to be introduced, you know, there were a few problems with that. So I think we were just trying to adapt and adjust on a daily basis, and try and change some of the things we were doing. So we may be going bird watching, but we might do it slightly differently. And I wouldn't draw attention to birds unless Peter drew my attention to them, because he was very aware there were some things that he couldn't actually see or do. And obviously it was quite good to know there was nothing wrong with his eyes or his eyesight.
So you were gradually finding ways of not stopping all the things you enjoyed doing and that Peter loved, but rather adapting and finding ways to keep doing them, maybe in a slightly different way. Yes,
I think that's a fair thing. And I think, you know, the daily, you know, you were always assessing things. I think the thing that we often felt was we were being caught out because we didn't know what was going to happen, because things would change. When people said about, you know, a difficult day, I said, no, this can change in 5 minutes. Yeah. And that was something I don't think we were prepared for. So it did catch us out quite often, and we think, oh, you've got to change that or do that. So I think you do have to be quite flexible, and also try and assess what situation you're in and look at strategies. But that's quite difficult to do on a daily basis, and we were grateful that we had other people helping to suggest things. And obviously the research that Peter took part in with the rare dementia support, they were all things he really wanted to take part in, and it made him feel that he was contributing to something which was really important for his own identity.
Absolutely. And so often hear that it's taking part in research and building and sharing your own experiences of the condition are a great way of sort of fighting back against it in some way and making that contribution.
Yes, yes, I think that was very helpful for him. What's your hope for PCA research moving forward?
I suppose my greatest hope is because for the majority of people, PCA has caused the underlying neurological disease is Alzheimer's disease. I remain very hopeful that the huge progress in international effort and energy that's going into finding either disease-modifying treatments or ultimately some sort of cure or something that really slows down the progression of the condition will apply and be effective not just for people with the memory-led and later onset forms of the condition, but also for people with PCA. So I suppose one of my hopes for future PCA research is that it would be representative, and that, for example, by making PCA better known and making appropriate adaptations to the kind of trials we do. So obviously, if you test out new Alzheimer drugs using visual memory tests, those are probably not going to be very appropriate measures for someone who, you know, couldn't see the thing you're asking them to remember in the first place. So by sharing awareness of what are appropriate measures of things like cognitive performance, be it perception or memory or language, and making sure that the design of new drug trials doesn't essentially exclude people with PCA, then I hope the PCA community will be able to join in and benefit from that wider research effort. And perhaps in the more immediate term, my hope is that we will keep having an increasing conversation that makes a larger number of groups and creative people around the world listen to the experiences of people with PCA, understand and investigate some of the lesser known or more poorly understood conditions associated with it, like balance problems or specific activities like reading problems, so that we can, even if we can't yet slow or stop the disease in the way that we want to, we can better support people to live and adapt. To use what you were saying, you and Peter did with many of your hobbies, advise people how to keep going with the things that are important and meaningful to them, in spite of the progressive changes in their vision and other skills. So that sort of dual aim of, yes, let's do all we can to find cures or disease-modifying treatments, but also let's not for a moment delay trying to provide people with the informed scientific basis of informed support that will help them to make the absolute most of lives being lived right now.
Thanks so much, Val and Seb, for your contributions to that video. I'm sure lots of you found that that it resonated possibly a lot with some of your experiences, and I think just such a nice opportunity to have those different types of expertise in one place. I think that will be a really valuable educational resource for us going forward. I'm always struck by the example Val uses of Peter being able to see the wrens but not the heron. And I think that's one of those sort of really unusual symptoms in PCA that can be quite hard to describe and quite hard for other people to understand. But the importance of being able to explain those things to family and friends and professionals as well, obviously, is really high. So great that we've got some resources in the works to be able to help us with that. And as I said, we'll link you to the longer version of that video if you would like to see more. And if you have any questions for Val and Seb following that video, do please send them in. So we're going to now move on to some research and service updates, and I'm first going to welcome Livy Wood, who many of you will have spoken to. She's part of our Rare Dementia Direct Support team, and Livy's going to tell us a bit about the service and the impact study. So over to Livy. Thanks, Livy.
Lovely. Thank you, Emma. And thank you, Val and Seb, for that amazing interview. Such a valuable contribution. I'm sure you'll all agree at home. So it's really lovely to be here today. It would be much better to see you all in person. My colleagues and I have been talking to our screens now since March, and as you can imagine, we'd much rather be looking at your lovely faces as opposed to our screens today. And we're really excited to see everyone again in person when it's safe to do so. I'm going to keep my contribution brief today as we have a lot of other fantastic speakers. But to introduce myself for those who I've not had the pleasure of speaking to, I'm Olivia or Livy, and I'm 1/3 of the direct support team along with my colleagues Mckee Zimmerman and Claire Waddington. And I'm also heavily involved in the RDS Impact project, which I'd like to speak to you a little bit about today. First though, about the direct support team and what we do. As of this week, we have a total of 655 members signed up to RDS for PCA support from around the world. And this number includes people with a diagnosis, their family members, friends, and also healthcare professionals who've come to us directly for support and advice for people with a PCA diagnosis. And this number is ever growing. So the direct support team can provide post-diagnostic support and person-centered support, along with information and advice about PCA. So whether this is navigating the healthcare system, getting a formal diagnosis, or helping people understand their diagnosis further. We can also signpost you to relevant services which assist greatly with things like care planning, and we can also guide you to appropriate local services and help in your area. We offer confidential support via email, telephone call, or now through an online video platform called GoToMeeting. That's a lot like Zoom for people who've used that before. If you think either yourself or a loved one would benefit from this, I'll be giving our contact email address at the end of my talk. So on to the research. So we're currently recruiting for the RDS Impact Study. A huge thank you for those who have already participated so far. This is the first major study looking at the value of support groups for people living with or supporting someone with a rare form of dementia. And we're looking to recruit people with a diagnosis, their carers and family members, and people who've previously cared for somebody with a rare type of dementia. So all experience from all different stages. So whether yourself or your loved one is at the beginning of their journey with PCA, or whether they've been diagnosed for some time, you're all expert in your own right, and we really want to hear your experiences and learn from you. So it's quite a large study. There are 5 parts to it. These include interviews and discussions. So this will be either individually with one of our research team or with other members in form of maybe a small group discussion. We have completing questionnaires and scales, helping us to develop our website or design measures, and creative activities, where we'll ask you to represent your responses by drawing rather than writing or telling us verbally. You can choose to take part in multiple parts of the study or just one if you prefer, and you can also change your mind or opt out of any part of the study if you no longer wish to be involved. The interviews would be on a yearly basis, and this is so we can track progress, but also identify any help and support that you may need. And at this point, it ties in quite nicely with how the RDS study and the direct support team really do come together. So as well as hugely benefiting the research project by sharing your thoughts, feelings and lived experiences in the interviews and small group discussions, it has also proved to be extremely good at identifying areas where you may need further support. So whether this is further education, information about future planning, or just enlightening as to what support services may actually be available to you. So for example, the Rare Dementia Support Buddying Service or local charities. So as a result, a high proportion of our interviews often lead to support calls with the direct support team to talk further about support needs and what is available. If you're interested in hearing more about the research, or if you'd like to chat to one of us regarding support, so please do email us. Our email address is contact@raredementiasupport.org. That's contact@raredementiasupport.org, and myself, Claire or Nikki will be in contact with you. Thank you all for listening, and I'm going to hand you back over to Emma.
Thanks very much, Livy. That's all great information. Thank you. And our next contributor is Dr. Kia Yong, who many of you will know is a Senior Research Fellow at the Dementia Research Centre at UCL, and Kia is joining us from Italy. So Wi-Fi permitting, he will be able to tell you a little bit about a citizen science research proposal. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Emma. So along with Seb, Val, Emma and others, I've been developing a research proposal on promoting citizen science working. Now, by this, I mean more formally acknowledging the roles of people living with PCA and family members, really in steering and directing avenues of research. Now, as we've heard briefly from Seb and Val, this is related to improving our understanding over the past few years of particular visual symptoms, so particular problems perceiving objects in clutter, particular reading difficulties, so for example, people's tendency to get lost on a page of text, or also balance disturbances, as well as, again, over recent years, really using this understanding to better inform support strategies. Now, a lot of these developments have really come about through exchanges with research participants, as well as support group members. But in addition, exchanges through support groups have really been key in promoting better professional understanding of counterintuitive symptoms and have led to the development of the first multi-center consensus criteria for posterior cortical atrophy to build capacity for larger scale studies of PCA. So the proposal that I've been developing really hopes to better harness both people's lived and professional expertise. So this includes, but isn't limited to people who might have professional backgrounds in health and social care, engineering and IT, education and communications, as well as design. So we really want to get through to people from a range of backgrounds and figure out how also to reach existing professionals with a range of backgrounds. Now, ultimately, we hope to better harness people's understanding and expertise to really get a better insight into some of the symptoms that are quite counterintuitive and don't, strictly speaking, relate just to vision alone. So these can include really difficulties in combining different types of senses during activities such as dressing or with aspects of mobility, and ultimately, again, to better support people living with these quite difficult to grasp and currently not well understood symptoms.
Thanks, Kia. Thank you for that update. That was great. And Kia will be on our panel as well later for questions and answers. So again, do feel free to send any over that you would like to put to Kia about research generally or that proposal in particular. I'm now going to welcome our regional group coordinator, Roberta Mckee Jackson, who many of you will know. And Roberta is going to give us an update about the regional side of the service and how that's all going at the moment. Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Emma. It's great to be here. And as Livy said, I'm sorry we can't see you all in person, but I would like to give you a little bit of an update about our regional groups. We have around 25 that are in existence throughout the UK, and that includes ones that support not only PCA, but PPA, FTD, and then we have some that we refer to as all types because they're ones that actually can cater to multiple of the various rare dementias. As you can imagine, during the lockdown, a lot of things have changed, and those same things have changed within our regional support groups. From the fact that you can no longer meet you can't meet in person, so we've been having virtual meetings with quite a few of our groups, and also, there's been issues within groups that say are supported by a trust or a charity where their resources have been pulled off for other things. So they're kind of on hold at the moment. So I will say that some of our groups are in flux. We've also had some issues with some of our regional facilitators who are either changing or perhaps for one reason or another have not been able to, step up to that. So there will be some changes being made, but what I would like to reiterate to everyone is these meetings are taking place virtually. I've made an offer to every single regional group to host a meeting through our GoToMeeting platform so that you can still meet and that you can still get together and share your experiences with the other people in your regional group. Some of the interesting things is, and there have been a number of groups that I've been hosting those meetings for. One interesting thing is that a couple of groups decided in July that they were going to try, because the weather was nice, that they would try actually meeting outside in a park or in a pub garden type situation. And we have another one that's doing that next month as well. I think that's probably going to bring an end to those group meetings outside just because of the weather, unless we have some really nice weather, you know, unexpectedly. But again, the offer to host these virtual meetings is always there. And, you know, I think it's proved a great lifeline for a lot of these groups that they can still meet virtually and share your experiences. We also have had plans to expand and create new groups. Some of those have somewhat been put on hold because a lot of those were centered around cultural venues in cities throughout the UK. Although I will say I have had a couple of people lately who have called, and I'm talking to them about starting some groups on their own in their area who would start virtually at this point in time, but then that may expand. So it's always in flux, but just for you to always know that there's regional support out there to provide for anybody. So if you have any questions about that, please get in touch with me and I'm happy to help you. Thank you, Emma, that's all.
Thanks very much, Roberta. And yeah, just so reassuring to know, especially at the moment, the flexibility in those formats for the regional group delivery. That's great. Thank you very much. And so we're now on to our next member contribution. So this, we're now going to redirect you to a video. And I think the video perhaps didn't work for a couple of you the first time around, or maybe you could only access the audio. And apologies for that, just to reassure you that the whole meeting will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel later. So you should be able to catch up with those videos later if they're not working for you at the moment. So I'm really pleased to introduce Martina Davis, a member of our PCA support group who was diagnosed with PCA last year, in conversation with Mckee Zimmerman, who leads our direct support team, who I'm sure most of you will have been in touch with at one point or another. And here's a conversation about the kind of challenges and management strategies that come with PCA day to day. So here's that video. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here again with you virtually. As I say every time, I'm missing seeing everybody, missing being at the Welcome Centre, but at least we're staying safe and well, and we are being able to bring you some sort of support via these support group meetings. I am delighted to be here with one of our very valued members, as you all are, of RDS. We have got with us today Martina Davis, and Martina was diagnosed with PCA in December last year, so 2019. And Martina is going to share some of her experience with us today. So first of all, Martina, can you tell me a little bit about the first signs you noticed and about the assessment and diagnosis process you went through, please?
Yes, good morning, Nikki. It's lovely to see you as always. Yeah, the first thing I noticed, and I didn't actually connect it to any illness, was that I was losing and lost the ability to write with my left hand. And I always up for rising to a challenge. I carried on and I actually taught myself to write with my right hand. Then shortly after that, I noticed that my abilities for calculating, which I needed in my business, I was self-employed, but calculation and administration, I could no longer hold that information at all in my head. So I went along to the doctors, who were really, really good, and we started the process of finding out what was wrong with me. And initially I was diagnosed with MCI. I was very fortunate in the assessments that I've had, and they were very much on the ball. And it took about 3 assessments and when I got my diagnosis of PCI. And from then, the support I've had from the team that have worked with me, the consultants team and the memory team, has been absolutely second to none. Going the extra mile all of the time, checking calls, it's all still happening now.
It's brilliant. It's so good to hear that you have had such a positive experience after having that diagnosis, and you've got so much support around you. We know from our members not everybody has such a thorough assessment. It happens so quickly to get that result to them, and you know, sometimes they're left sort of without any support. So it's really lovely that you always tell me about the fantastic sort of members of the team that, you know, are still supporting you today. Are there any particular day-to-day challenges that you've associated with the more physical aspects of having PCA?
Yes, falling, walking into doors, all the usual stuff really. The challenges of words upside down and inside out. I'm sure there should be a degree in there somewhere for me, but you know, typing, I won't give up on that, but that's becoming a thing of the past. And against all these challenges that I have faced now, it seems such a shame that it's related to all the things I used to do. You know, I used to have an accounting business, I used to write for a magazine, I used to create spreadsheets for business clients to see how the business was going. So all these challenges that have now come along, sometimes you don't know what to do. But then I was taught by Mckee, I've always been a good problem solver, to take my skills of positivity and objectivity and actually move them into where I am now. And I would say that's a turning point for me. And now what I do is I don't say I've got a diagnosis or I've got PCA. What I actually do is I say, fine, I've got this diagnosis, I have got PCA, but you know, come on girl, let's actually use these skills that you've got and let's actually match them up. And if there are things that I can't manage, I will ask for help. So yeah, those challenges are quite gruesome at times, but I manage them.
I'll just sort of clarify here that Mckee is your OT at home, and I'm not taking credit for all of this because my name's Mckee as well, but you're very lucky to have that support. It's great, and she does sound absolutely fantastic. Now, sort of since I sort of initially sort of met you, we've had quite a few conversations, and we've talked about positive risks and finding solutions, because I always feel with you, you've always got a solution for anything that you sort of come against. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think being self-employed, and I've been self-employed for most of my life, and personally for me, I think that's helped me get through so much, because self-employment means you have got to keep finding solutions, you have got to keep finding clients, you have got to keep going. And so in a strange way, I call what I've got mountains and molehills. And I had mountains and molehills in my previous life, if you like. They just happen to be stinkers sometimes. And I think acknowledging and finding solutions hopefully puts back the day when these things become volcanoes and start erupting. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I do use a lot of expressions when I'm speaking. And the reason for that is because it's not only my typing and writing and reading that's totally gone down the Swanee, it's because also my thinking is very difficult. And that's one of the biggest challenges that I've had. So finding the solutions of being able to bore people senseless the way I do has actually been able to find expressions that just come out from, you know, from nowhere. And that is also enabling me to be able to hold conversations and carry on the way I do.
I love your creative expressions. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Such a picture in my mind every time that we have our conversations. Now, you're really quite an active person and always been very well engaged with your community. How have you managed to continue with managing the engagement with activities?
I think it's got to be through positivity. And, you know, there are lots of days when I don't feel so positive. You know, I'm not this Jack in the Box jumping Mexican bean, see, here we go again, sort of person that is, you know, is the Duracell bunny. But I think I never wake up in the morning thinking, what's today going to be like? How am I going to feel? I get up in the morning and say, right, it's another day, and move forward in that day. And I think that positivity also helps people around me in engaging with me, because I like to think that I export something to them that they'll pick up and they'll actually run with. And instead of saying to me, oh dear, what's wrong with you? How are you today? They'll say, how are you today? Is there anything wrong? Is there anything I can help with? And I think that makes the biggest difference to your life, because it's absolute pants when you're looking for something that you know is where it should be, and then you go back and you find it. It's rubbish when you're pouring something out of a jug or a glass, and you can hear that noise, but your eyes are telling you that it's in suspended animation. And getting people to try and accept and interact with that isn't easy. You know, the strange looks for me are now going, I think, when I say, well, actually, do you really want to know? I've just seen this. There was a jug on the floor that, you know, I walked past, and I think that's Rocky the cat. And I walked past it one day and it moved. And I looked down and I said, oh, thank God, Rocky, it is you. You know, as it wandered off. So it's that kind of positivity, instead of saying, oh, here we go again, and it bringing you down. I think it's that's helped me with engaging with people, and I think people have got a certain amount of respect, because I am trying to be as positive as I can, even during the absolute rubbish days.
That's fantastic. I'm sure you bring lots of positivity to everybody's lives, Martina. Now, we often hear about people feeling isolated when they've got a diagnosis of PCA. Has isolation affected you at all?
Yes, it has. I think PCA is a strange one in terms of isolation, because apart from anything else, it's the visual impairment side of things. I think people are much better when they can either see, feel or touch something. And I think the empathy that comes through with an illness that they can see, feel and touch is different to what I've experienced with PCA. And that isolation of looking at things and not seeing things, and then seeing things, and then seeing my own decline in terms of reading and writing, yeah, I felt very isolated. I think there's two types of isolation, and I think the other type is where it would be easy without the positivity and without support for you to think, well, where's the point? You know, oh, I'll go and get dressed in an hour's time, or I'll go and do this in an hour's time. And I think that's a different kind of isolation, because before you know it, time has marched on, and then you've sort of spent half a day, and then you're creating another sort of isolation, or another isolation is being created. So I think there's two kinds of isolation that, in my opinion, would affect people with PCA and maybe other dementias, but that's what I found. And it was very hard initially to get over the first type of isolation and try to get people to understand. Even, you know, I would put books in front of, leaflets in front of people, and it was just, they were pushed out, well, you know, you've got dementia. No, I haven't. I have, but I have got this type of dementia. And this isn't about me shouting or anything else. This is about me saying quite loudly, please, can you help me? Can you at least look at these things and try and help me with that isolation?
Great advocate out there you are, certainly. Now, have you got any inspiring advice for others living with PCA, and perhaps a few wise words as well for their partners or carers for them to help them live independently?
I think the independent living in any diagnosis is incredibly important, and I think it has to interact with positivity, and it has to interact with how you see it and where you want to be. For me, what's got through me an awful lot is that I've decided that I have to relearn things and I have to create new habits. And if I do that, that gives me the wherewithal to actually continue doing it, because this disease, it changes all the time, whether that's rapidly, slowly, it doesn't really matter, but it is changing. So if I give myself the capacity of being able to make those habits become habits of the future now, then that will also give me the capacity to carry on doing it. Before I got my diagnosis, my makeup, now this might seem absolutely ridiculous, but my makeup was a big part of my life. And the only way I could actually work out the right way to do it, everything had to be in line, because I was putting everything on the wrong way round, because I couldn't see what the mascara was, I couldn't see what the blusher was, why had I got lipstick on my nose, you know. And so this was before I'd even gone to the doctor, so I knew there were things wrong. So I'd worked out a way of lining up the brushes, lining up the pots, and just actually going through everything. I relearned how to put my makeup on. I created a new habit. Like showering. Showering's become a military operation, and the only way to do that is the same as dressing, is number things. If you've got 7 things on a bed and there's nothing left on it, then you know you're fully dressed. You know, the same with showering. Everything's lined up, and that way I know I haven't got in there with my PJs on or any clothes. So relearn those habits. Get people to help you relearn those habits, and it's never too late. Never too late at all. I know the diagnosis as it progresses will change how that's done. But you'll know you're succeeding because you're actually still finding solutions. Don't say I can't do this anymore, just say I need to find a new way to do it. And equally, you're not a failure. You are nowhere near a failure if you decide, you know what, I'm going to call this a day. I'm actually going to say, I can't be bothered with this anymore because it's becoming too difficult. So say to somebody, right, can you give me a hand with this? If you need a hand with all of it, fantastic. If you only need a hand with a little bit of it, then that's absolutely great. But nobody will see you as a failure. And the most important thing is, do not see yourself as a failure. See yourself as a realist, moving on and putting positive energy into what you can do, and being big enough to ask for help for the things that you can't. Honestly, believe me, stand on me, it's the stuff self-esteem is made of. It really, really is. And laugh. Laughter is the biggest magnet. And don't just laugh for yourselves, because if you can laugh and you can find the funny side of things, or you can find laughter in some really happy memories, by laughing, you are engaging people, you're bringing them in. So laugh. People looking after people, it is heartbreaking when you see a person you care for unable to manage, but don't just say, I'm going to do it. Don't take it away. Just say, can I help you? Is there anything that you need help with? Or just think, is there any way to help keep that person's self-esteem and dignity? don't automatically think you're doing it with the best will in the world, but don't just override it, because your kindness and understanding is a wonderful thing, and trying to understand and work with that person, that is the greatest gift you will ever give them. That really, really is a great gift.
Thank you so much, Martina. Lots of wise words there and very inspiring, as always my conversations are with you. So I think, you know, it'd be very much appreciated by our audience out there today. And we're also going to be very lucky, Martina will be on our question and answer panel later this morning. So any questions, please fire them in to the sources to do the chat today, and we'll be able to collect those a little bit later. Thank you all for listening to us, and I really hope you've got something out of this today, because Martina is truly a very inspiring lady.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Martina and Mckee, for that really, really inspiring and really frank conversation as well. I'm sure there's lots in there that's resonating with everyone at home, and just so helpful to have you talk, Martina, about that balance between independence and asking for help, and the challenges, but also the skills. And I know those are things that our members are negotiating, you know, every day. So it's so helpful to have a real lived experience perspective on those. And yeah, just really uplifting. Thank you. So we're now moving on to questions. So do send in any questions you have for Martina as well. And I'm going to welcome back the panel, our discussion panel members. So hopefully they'll start popping up around me. So we have Livy from Direct Support Team, who you know. Also really pleased to welcome Ross. So Ross is a Senior Clinical Research Fellow and Honorary Consultant Neurologist at UCL, who some of you will know. And Val and Martina, our members, thank you so much for coming back to answer some questions. And Kia, your internet is holding up, that's fab. We're all going strong. Okay, great. So the first question I was going to ask, we had something in the newsletter this time about hearing, and we often talk about PCA as a visual type of dementia, but we know there are other symptoms as well as the visual. So I just wondered if anyone on our panel would be willing to talk a little bit about some of those non-visual symptoms. Perhaps Val and Martina and Ross, we could come to you. Val, do you want to get us started?
Yes, thank you. I think perhaps some of the things we hadn't appreciated that were connected with PCA were things like locating sounds and also the volume of sound. Sometimes it was quite difficult for Peter to know where the sound was coming from, if it was behind. And then he would sometimes say, oh, that's really loud, but is that just me? So I think there was an inconsistency to the volume of sounds that he was hearing, as well as where the sound was located. I don't know if that's the same with Martina, or if anyone else has any comments on that.
Yeah, I think with sound, I think the first time I noticed that there was something wrong, if that's the right word to use, was we were at a small family gathering, and somebody started to fire off party poppers. And I noticed that it actually felt like explosions were being carried out in my head. And it had almost reached a point where it felt as if my brain was going to explode. And it was a bit like the handwriting. I didn't really make any real connections. It was afterwards that it's, as Val has just said, volumes, locating noise, is it just me? Even this morning, strangely enough, somebody went out of the, I thought somebody had gone outside, and I shouted through the bathroom window because it felt as if their voice had been thrown, and they were actually in the hallway. So it's a strange sensation.
I might just pick up on that a little bit from a medical point of view, because these are really nice descriptions. and they fit in quite well with what we understand of the brain. And the hearing is hearing, and the process of hearing and how your brain understands sounds and noise is quite complicated. But the back of the brain has responsibility for understanding where sounds and noises are in space. And one of the original descriptions actually of hearing problems in PCA and Alzheimer's disease is the cocktail party syndrome, where people can't quite work out in a really crowded auditory environment where sounds are coming from, and filtering the sounds that are immediately in your focus from those that are in the background. And I think that's the sort of problems that people often describe with hearing. But having said that, not everybody with PCA gets hearing problems. So if that part of the brain in your case is not involved, then you may not have any hearing difficulties.
Thank you all. That's really helpful, yeah, from both perspectives to understand that a little bit more. Thank you. The next question I was going to go to is that earlier this month we had the big International Alzheimer's Association International Conference, and just wondered, Kia, perhaps if you could pick up on anything key from the conference that might be relevant for our PCA support group members.
Thanks, Emma. So there was a variety of topics covered. At this year's AIC, despite the fact that it was in person, if anything, it made it actually more accessible for a lot of international researchers because it was free. So they had over 20,000 people register. For context, this is the largest conference of Alzheimer's and dementia worldwide. So some highlights included, for example, Nick Fox's plenary talk on early onset Alzheimer's disease, which covered some particular contributions that UCL and collaborating partners, as well as acknowledging the contributions of, again, support group members and research participants, have enabled over recent years. This includes the largest study of posterior cortical atrophy to date, so looking at risk factors for PCA, really led by John Schott, as well as the development of the consensus criteria that I described earlier. And these outputs have really also been enabled through the Atypical Alzheimer's Disease Professional Interest Area Group, for which I was elected Communications Chair last year. And another thing I'd like to note is at this conference, there was a lot of talk about what I consider to be other exemplar atypical AD presentations, posterior cortical atrophy being one of them, sometimes referred to as the visual variant of Alzheimer's disease. But there's also more movement-led presentations of Alzheimer's disease where people have particular difficulties, say, with coordinating actions, or more language-led presentations of Alzheimer's disease, where, for example, some auditory problems or problems with speech and comprehension can be the earliest symptoms, in contrast to relatively spared memory. But some of the other things that's worth noting is that last year, UCL, along with partners in University of California, San Francisco, and University Virgin de Rotio in Spain, published the largest study of changes of PCA over time, both in terms of anatomy as well as cognitive changes. But the thing that was also acknowledged this year through winning an award on non-pharmacological interventions to manage some of these visual symptoms and changes in sense of space that aren't, strictly speaking, just visual, as we've heard, was also on UCL's involvement leading the only non-pharmacological group studies, again, looking to address some of these symptoms. Something I'd like to note, coming more from a different perspective, is that over the last 10 years, there's been an increased focus on really what have been referred to as biologically defined variants of Alzheimer's disease. So rather than coming from a symptom level, so I've been talking about visual symptoms, motor symptoms, language symptoms, that owing largely to the increasing availability of, say, structural MRI, functional MRI, or PET scanning, that this has been used as well to get an understanding about, well, how come some people have the same underlying changes that cause Alzheimer's, but differ a lot, not only in terms of the symptoms they're experiencing, but also certain structural aspects, say, of the brain.
Thanks, Kia. And yeah, really encouraging to just know what's happening, particularly in PCA. That's really helpful. Thank you. Ross, I saw you scribbling. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add a couple of things. I think Kia's given a very comprehensive summary, but there was one really exciting thing I think that came out of AAIC this year, which was the blood tests for diagnosing Alzheimer's disease, and that's I think that's a real breakthrough for diagnosis, because many people in the group, I'm sure, will have had a lumbar puncture to confirm the diagnosis, and they've now developed a blood test which is looking really promising for being able to pick up the changes of Alzheimer's disease in the body, which is potentially, I think, 5 years down the line, may become the sort of standard treatment or standard assessment tool rather than a lumbar puncture. So I think that's good news generally. I think in terms of drug trials, it was perhaps a little disappointing. I don't know if I missed something here, but there was no major breakthroughs on treatments. But the other thing that I think is quite interesting is there was a big session on clearing the brain and the brain's ability to clear proteins like amyloid. And I think that's becoming a much more prominent area of research. I think we'll see some quite interesting things there in future in terms of developing new medicines.
Thank you. That's all great to hear. Thanks, Ross. Okay, so our next question comes from a member, and I wonder, Livy, if you might be able to tell us a little bit about the buddying system in response to this. So someone has said, after 18 months since my diagnosis, I have not been able to find anyone else with PCA in my area. I find emailing and texting difficult, but I would like to be able to contact others by phone. Could you just tell us a little bit about remind us about the buddying scheme? Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone. I knew I was going to do that at some point today. So yes, at RDS, we have a buddying scheme. So what that entails is people who are interested in peer-to-peer support. So this is informal, casual support with someone who's in a similar situation to themselves. So this is for people with a diagnosis of rare dementia, but also for family relatives, carers who may also be interested in being buddied with someone going through a similar situation to themselves. What we can do is my colleague Mckee and Claire and myself work quite hard to try and match people, and so it's a good match with someone who has shared experiences with yourself and put you in contact. And this is again for informal peer-to-peer support. If this is something which you're interested in, if you're interested in joining our buddying system, then please do give us an email at our contact@raredementia support.org email address, and we can add you to that. We might just have a chat with you as well to get a few more extra questions to see whether it's suitable for you as well, or if there's anything else which we can help with in the meantime.
Thanks, Livy. And I think that's it's so common with rare conditions, obviously, that it is really hard to naturally come across people who know something of the experience that you're going through. So that's something that the buddying scheme is really great to facilitate. I wondered, Val and Martina, if you wanted to share anything about the benefit of peer support, or what it's offered you to be able to connect with other people who know something about PCA and your experience.
I think one of the great things is the groups that I've been involved with, everybody is completely and utterly non-judgmental. I'm not suggesting for 1 second that people are out there and they hear that you've got a rare dementia or an illness of some kind, that they're judgmental, but because people have got such a preconceived idea about what they consider dementia is, there is an element of judgment that's actually made about you, and you find that you're talking to somebody and they're already making decisions about you and about your illness and what's going to happen to you. And I've found the benefits of the peer support, the groups, the camaraderie in one particular group that I'm involved in, the discussions that come out, the sheer banter and sometimes absolute nonsense does so much, really does do so much for your self-esteem. but also hearing other people's experiences gives me a lot to reflect on. When those meetings actually close down, and Mckee, when she supplies the notes for us, they are actually, I wrote to her in the early stages of this, and I actually said, thank you for creating some really lovely memories, because these meetings, these group meetings, these peer things, they're not just about what you get out on the day. I'm learning about other people, I'm learning about other people's behaviour, I'm learning about how they deal with it, but also I'm having some absolutely fabulous memories that are being created. So I would say to anybody, and particularly the organisers, do not do away with them, will you? Because they are so valuable. They really, really are valuable.
Yes, I'd like to echo all the things that Martina said, and we sort of access things at 3 levels really. So we had rare dementia support in London. We were also members of our regional support group, which again, I still meet up, virtually at the moment with regional support members in the group that we were involved with, but also part of the buddying system that I think when you started it, Emma, I was at the very sort of forefront of trying to see how that would work. And I found that extremely helpful, having somebody else who had a better understanding than me and could suggest even more things than, we had hoped for. So we found it absolutely fantastic. So thank you.
Thanks, Val, Martina and Libby. Yeah, and do everyone get in touch if you would like to explore buddying a bit more. We've got a question here about hallucinations and misperceptions, and I know these can sometimes be a bit confused, especially in PCA. So the question is, what is the difference between hallucinations and misperceptions, and do both happen in PCA? And as a follow-on, is there any medication which can help with hallucinations? Ross, could I come to you first for that one?
Yes, you can. So that's quite a slightly difficult question, because there are textbook definitions of both of these things, but I think in practice, hallucinations are where you have something completely new in your mind that you see, and it's often animals or children, and there's no basis for them. There's nothing in the world that has triggered these. Whereas misperceptions are where you see some visual cue in the world and then you misinterpret it for something else. So often when the light is dimming, you might see the curtain and think that it's a person standing in the room, or you had somebody recently who was looking at hanging baskets of geraniums and thought it was somebody with a red hat. So that would be a misperception. In terms of treatment, we tend to recommend the use of cholinesterase inhibitors for treating hallucinations. They have a modest effect. They don't always work, but normally in clinic, I would try rivastigmine as a first-line treatment for hallucinations, which is available either as a tablet or as a patch. So some people respond to that. And the other cholinesterase inhibitor that can help is donepezil. So that would be the treatments that we would consider.
Thank you, Ross. Did anyone else want to add anything on to that?
Yes, can I just ask, there were times where I live in an intergeneration house, so there were times where my grandchildren may well have been sitting at the table, but to Peter, he said, oh, be careful because you're standing on top of the table. And I wasn't quite sure where that came in the whole misperception, not necessarily hallucination stage. And similarly, they were standing in the bedroom and he thought they were on the windowsill. So that was something that was quite scary for him because he was worried they were going to hurt themselves. So that's one example. We did find that the rivastigmine patches, as Ross said, actually were helpful to help with low mood as well. I don't know if that is something that they're used for, as well as some of the other treatments, I'm not sure. And then the only time that Peter had hallucinations was when he was in hospital, and they were trying to see if some of the Parkinson's drugs, even though he didn't have Parkinson's, he'd had scans for that, if the Parkinson's drugs would help with mobility, but they caused severe hallucinations. So that was the only time that he had real hallucinations. And obviously the consultant said, you know, where animals were on top of the rails, and as you said, they're quite frightening. So obviously that had to be stopped. But I'm just interested to know where this idea of whether it's a misperception, if you're seeing somebody in a different place again. Perhaps you could explain that.
So yeah, I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that. Is the honest truth. And I think in PCA, lots of things to do with visual perception are very complex, and they don't fit into the sort of standard canonical descriptions of visual perceptual problems that we recognise and are in the textbooks. Keir, being the expert in this, will maybe be able to say some more. But being honest, I find these things very difficult to categorise and to describe. The second point about hallucinations and the other things that can trigger them, these are very good points, Val. And while we're often tempted to rush in with medication, in reality, it's good to first of all establish, well, are the hallucinations bothering that person, or are they bothering those around them? So should we treat them? And then the second thing is to try and do simple things that will perhaps stop them being provoked. So often painkillers, like opiate painkillers, like codeine, morphine, things like that, can make hallucinations worse. So avoid these if possible. Improved lighting, because in an evening, dim lighting often brings on misperceptions. And then if people are unwell for other medical reasons, you know, if these have come on out of the blue, then just make sure that people don't have a chest infection or a urinary infection or something like that. And the kind of classic trigger is dopamine. So people who are having their trial of levodopa that might help with the symptoms of Parkinsonism, that can often trigger quite florid hallucinations. You just have to be really careful. And often it's good to do that in a controlled environment. And you know, it's fine to try them as long as everybody knows that if they don't work, you know, you must stop them if the hallucinations appear.
Yes, it was that particular drug actually in a hospital environment, so it was being controlled. Thank you.
So just to chip in, and to emphasize that I'm not a clinician, my background definitely isn't in visual or other types of hallucinations. It's more really to do with visual perception and also sense of space. But I'll just start by saying, or relaying the account of a gentleman who'd been involved in research a number of years back, where he would see these shadowy figures around the home. He had great insight into them, and they didn't really cause him any discomfort, but he was quite candid, and he'd say, you know, you'd see these figures around the home, but they'd never go into the bedroom. And this is just to highlight how there could be a number of things that could account for this. You know, you could say that there's an expectation aspect where, you know, I might generally expect to see, if I was to see people in my home, in the corridor, you know, at the front door, but not necessarily in a private place. It could be aspects to do about the visual environment of his bedroom. So let's say there's less features that are less susceptible to being misperceived as a person. So let's say it's a hat on a coat stand. Our visual system is highly calibrated to perceive faces where actually it's really a collection of noise, you know, relatively simple features that we might perceive as a face, which is why cartoonish faces, you know, they can be surprisingly evocative of a face. But in addition, as Ross has said, visual symptoms in PCA are inherently really very complicated. It's not one visual problem. Almost by nature, it's a combination of visual difficulties. So for some people, it's more of a problem perceiving objects amongst clutter. So Val, to go to your example, maybe it was the line, say, of the table next to, say, the line of the windowsill, which perhaps jumbled. For some people, it could be difficulties reliably directing eye movement. So maybe someone's gaze went off slightly further off from what it was intended to be, and thus people's perception of space was slightly disturbed. And for other people, it's really understanding spatial relationships. So it's concepts such as left or right, which can be, again, less reliable, say, than before PCA. And ultimately, under all of this is the fact that I think the boundary between perception and hallucination, if you're relying on people's kind of retrospective accounts, it can be quite hard to disentangle what the basis was.
Thank you, everyone, for a really good and thorough exploration of that issue and all the complexities. A question now for Val and Martina. Any practical advice on making eating out as easy and dignified as possible? Challenges include surrounding conversations and getting the food from plate to mouth.
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Clearly, things like obviously plates against a white plate or against a white tablecloth, coloured napkins, they can help with your dignity of actually feeling and finding your way through things. Lots of little things that people actually wouldn't even give a second thought to are actually quite practical. People, if you've got your knife and fork the wrong way around, be gentle and kind of sort of say, oh, just hang on a sec, can you pop that down and turn it round, and help in those ways. Don't make big issues of them, because always remember the person knows what those issues are themselves. So help them by not making a big deal of it. And there's nothing wrong either. I'm not ashamed of my PCA diagnosis. You know, I've got what I've got, and that's all there is to it. And if it means somebody needing to go and have a quiet word in somebody's ear, just, you know, if you put something down or can you change things, I actually don't mind that, because I'd rather still be able to go out and about than find that I'm limited by other people's embarrassment and by my realizing what's happening. And it's about this, you know, please help me, but don't make a big deal of it.
Yes, I would totally agree with that, Martina. Interestingly, when we used to go out, I used to try and make sure we had a table where there was enough space for Peter to be able to move around and to get into the chair, which sometimes is a bit tricky. So I always used to say that before I booked somewhere. And obviously once there was a diagnosis and Peter had received a severe sight impairment, that actually helped in some ways, because people then had a bit more of a label and understanding. So actually that was helpful. Finding your way through the cutlery and plates on a shiny table didn't bother Peter. And I know a lot of people with PCA find that very difficult. Although having said that, I don't think people should be afraid to eat things with their fingers, and you know, that's not a problem. I think on one occasion I was a bit alarmed when he tried to tackle mussels with a knife and fork, and I was thinking, oh no, I'm not quite sure I've done this risk assessment. So we did just try and talk about that and say, I said, would you like me to, can I help you, you know, get the mussels out? And I can do it myself. So then we tried to find another way of doing it. So I think, as you say, it's just the constant problem solving, finding a way. And I think the message that comes through very, very strongly from the very beginning of the time we've been involved with rare dementia support in the centre is that you're living with this condition, and there are ways that you need to try and change, adapt, but it shouldn't stop you doing some of the things that you enjoy. But you might need to take a bit more time and perhaps allow a few more things to happen. If food goes on the floor or something, well, that's one of those things.
Thank you both. Thank you. The next question, I wondered maybe if Keir and Livy, you might be able to share some thoughts on this one. So it's about getting certified, and Val, you led us nicely into this, a certificate of visual impairment, and how much does that, so there are a couple of questions about this. I'm going to try and seamlessly merge them into one. How much does that allow for perceptual problems as well as just sight difficulties? Is anyone working on redefining those terms? And do we have any advice for anyone who is going to see an ophthalmologist to get certified? Yes, so any thoughts on that?
So I can start quickly. So while we have seen, again, from feedback from support group members and research participants, some improvement in people who are getting registered as being sight impaired or severely sight impaired over the last few years, clearly there's still a way to go where, you know, it is common for people to see an eye health professional and then for them to be told, well, your eyes are fine, so I'm not really sure why we're having this conversation. But emphasizing, I'm not an ophthalmologist or an optometrist. My understanding is on the certificate for visual impairment, there is a category where it's sight loss owing to a cortical basis. So for example, someone who's had a stroke and then they've had visual loss because of their stroke. I think it's probably sensible to include maybe in the minutes from this meeting that there's an article from a neuro-ophthalmologist who's infinitely more qualified than I am to talk about this. It's based on his recommendation that PCA should be grounds as being sufficient for being severely sight impaired, even for people who have spared visual acuity. So for example, people might be familiar with that acuity chart. We have lots of letters, and unfortunately people with PCA sometimes can get lost in the chart, but actually if you're presenting them those letters one by one, their acuity could be quite good. But just because their acuity is good, it shouldn't say that they don't have a sight impairment, for example. And also, I think another thing that could be included on minutes is some training we put out with the College of Optometrists. This was something that a few people actually involved in the support groups have contributed to, something called Which Test is Best, where 3 people with PCA were independently assessed by an ophthalmologist, an optometrist, and a neurologist to get an idea about how to reliably assess visual functions for people who've got diminished vision owing to PCA.
Thanks, Keir.
And also quickly, Tim Shakespeare put out an article specifically for optometrists. I also put out an article for Acuity magazine, which is the optometrist professional magazine. And perhaps these articles could also be shared if someone is due to have an appointment with an eye health professional.
Thank you, Keir. Libby?
Yeah, lovely. So just to lead on from that, I think it's important to note that we do have a lot of health professionals who come through our rare dementia support subscription mailing list, and there has been quite a lot of ophthalmologists who have been in contact with us directly to get some more understanding of what PCA is. Maybe just to add something about being registered as sight impaired and with benefits, and just to emphasize that you are the experts, and sometimes in these situations you might find that he who shouts the loudest gets heard. And just to let you know that everyone at Rare Dementia Support and within the direct support team, we're really happy to support you with that, and we emphasize really listing out what the issues are, and sometimes this can help influence people and for them to take you more seriously. Many times people get denied things, and it's often that a second time appeal has a much higher success rate. So when applying for things, maybe expect to be turned down the first time and then go back and appeal, and you'll find that it's more highly successful. And yes, as I'll say again, we're more than happy to support you with that process.
Thank you, Libby. And I think, yes, if we can maybe think about how we could put together those articles and things that might be helpful in a pack, that we often think about educating professionals, obviously, and that's a real focus of the service going forward. But we know that often our members are in a really good position to do some of that educating. If you're already in touch with those professionals, it will be really helpful if we can provide you with some materials that you can take along with you to those sorts of appointments. And we've done similar resources for kind of hospital admissions, those sorts of things. So yeah, those are definitely in our plans.
On that note, can I emphasize the value of people living with PCA contributing to experience directly? Because I just like to pick up on a point Martina made about, for example, with words, sometimes they're inside out or upside down. I think historically an issue with, say, someone like who's got a neuropsychology background like myself is you fall on jargonistic kind of discipline-specific words. So I might refer to a peripheral acquired dyslexia, but if I'm saying that to an occupational therapist, like, you know, it doesn't necessarily carry so much meaning. So I just like to emphasize how valuable it can be for people. I know Val also has done a lot of professional engagement, people actually speaking directly to a range of professionals. And I'd like to think that we're improving, you know, at UCL and how we communicate between different professional audiences.
Thanks.
If you're struggling, I was just going to say, if you're struggling, don't be shy to ask for a second opinion, because you know, not all doctors, ophthalmologists get it right, and you know, most people are pretty relaxed about people going and seeking a second opinion. So you should do that if you're not getting the support or the diagnosis that you feel that you've got.
Sorry, could I ask a question, please? So what's the definitive, what is the measuring stick of actually granting somebody a certificate of visual impairment? Is it because they physically can't see the letters, or it's diminishing, or does it depend where you go as to whether somebody will actually have an open mind and say, well, hang on a minute, let's ask a few more questions, or is that can it be as long as a piece of string?
I don't know the criteria for you know, declaring somebody visually impaired, but what I can say is that if you do visual acuity test and you do all the sort of standard ophthalmological assessment, and somebody with PCA, they can sail through it with completely normal results. And it's only when you start listening to the history, the story, that actually some of these things, like Val's description of the wren and the heron and the appearance of somebody standing on the table, that's what gives it away.
I think, but if I just may say, if we got time, we did find it took a long time to actually get a referral to be able to go and get a certificate. In the end, we did go to, I think it was a neuro-ophthalmologist, I think I'm right in saying that, but we had to wait a year and a half. And the first assessment that we had before then, Peter didn't pass because he could walk the distance that you had to walk. So even though he might look at the green man and think that's fine to walk across the road, or he might look at the green traffic light and think, oh, that's fine to go across the road. That didn't come into it. So I think some of the criteria may be changing a little at this time. I believe that they're looking at revising some of the guidelines. So I think, again, just be persistent and try and make sure you get you know, the best opportunities that you can with your regional support that you have in the area that you are, and do contact RDS, because you know they're very good at signposting where you might be able to go to. And as Keir said, you know, collecting all this information together is going to be invaluable when you already have quite an exhaustive time trying to find your way through any of the systems. And if you're lucky and you can coordinate some of them, you're doing a really good job.
Thank you, Val, and everyone for all your thoughts on that. And I think, yeah, we've previously recommended neuro-ophthalmologists where we've known that they've had experience with PCA beforehand. And I think going forward, it would be really nice if we can, using the information we have from those different professionals that are registered with us, if we can start to sort of map out a network of people we know who know of PCA, and I'm sure that will be a part of our kind of educational and professional education plan going forward. Thank you all of our panelists so much for your contributions. We're just out of time now, but we do have questions that we haven't managed to answer today, so we'll discuss, and hopefully we'll be able to record a kind of follow-up session like this to get through the rest of those questions, and to send that on to you, and we'll send you the link to the recording of this whole session once that's ready. But I just wanted to say thank you ever so much to our panelists for all of your contributions. It's been so helpful, and I'm sure everyone at home has found it really informative and inspiring as well. I also wanted to shout out to those behind the scenes who are doing lots, but we can't see them. So thanks to Millie and Emily and Roberta and Mckee and Claire for all the work they've done to make today happen as well. That we're aware, obviously, that it is a very challenging, difficult time at the moment, and things are changing. So maybe some of you are getting out and about a bit more. Maybe some of you aren't able to yet, and I know that's coming with all of its own kind of stresses. And we have put together a survey to try and better capture the experiences of people with rare dementias in particular during lockdown. And I know lots of you have already completed that, so thank you ever so much for your contributions to that. And just to not forget that we're here, as we've mentioned, throughout between meetings as well. So do get in touch with the direct support team. If you have any follow-on questions for any of our panelists, do just get in touch. We're definitely here between meetings and would always love to hear from you, whether it's just for a general check-in or a catch-up, or you have specific queries. Do let us know. I'm not sure if Seb is going to pop in and say anything to wrap up, or if he's happy for us to just, it looks like it. There we go. Thanks.
No need really for me to say anything other than to say particular thanks to you, Emma, for coordinating all of today, bringing the agenda together, and these fabulous speakers. I've been busily in the background listening in and scribbling down a number of the particularly that Val and Martina, but also some of the questioners have been sharing. And as with all of these meetings, it provides us with real food for thought, both for trying to understand and support these symptoms and experiences that you're having better, and also to dig into the science. There are several things that have been said that I think we genuinely don't know always why these things are occurring, why you're grappling with some of the problems that you are, and it's truly inspiring, and I hope for you encouraging that we will be working away between meetings to try and not just get a better answer, but actually deepen our understanding about the nature of this condition.
Thank you. Thanks, Seb. So we'll all wave goodbye now, but we're going to leave you with a brief video about the fundraising for rare dementia support from the National Brain Appeal. But yes, thank you all. It's been great to see you, and bye from all of us.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund held by the charity the National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia supports 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support, and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through Rare Dementia Support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.